welcome to the first late night live podcast at the Love Tutoring Festival 2. There are a number of us gathered here in the crowd today. Podcast listeners won't obviously be able to see everyone here, but there is a small crowd of interested listeners to hear this evening's guest. And that guest is Femtino, who, let's be honest, is about 5 or 6 months late to being a guest on this podcast. It's really to our detriment that we've not brought Sid onto the podcast before, a podcast guest herself, and also the founder of the UK Educators Community and UK Virtual School and Femtinos, and a series of other ventures and projects, past, present and future. So this is personally, I think a brilliant way to kick off the Late Night Live podcast, which will take place every evening at the Love Tutoring Festival from 9 p.m. GMT UK time. So as a brief introduction, although I have just given away a little bit about what Sid does, Sid is a multi-award winning entrepreneur who has, as I mentioned just there, multiple successful businesses in the education sector. Her most recent venture, she started during the COVID lockdown in June 2020 and has grown the business to a whopping team of 20 individuals, 20 members of the UK Educators Community team. Sid is passionate about impacting the world through education and supporting other educators to achieve sustainable businesses driven by social change. She set up UK Educators Community after realizing simply there was not enough business support available specifically for the education industry. Now, her new membership program, the UK Ed Tribe, the UK Educators Community Tribe, is a monthly support program to really push and excel your business. So you can contact Sid at ukeducators.com, or you can visit the website ukeducators.com to find out more and join the tribe. A huge thank you to our lead sponsors for the entire Love Tutoring Festival, Nudge Education, who've done a wonderful job today and will continue to do so, I hope, for the next 4 days, and also to Remedy Tutors, part of the Remedy recruitment group, for sponsoring all of the events on day one of this festival, this current event being the final one of those. So, that's a long intro. Sid, how are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Ludo. What an intro, Ludo. I'm excited to be on this podcast. It has been a long time waiting, but I wasn't expecting a live podcast, so this is exciting. This is my first live podcast like this, so I'm excited. Yeah,
it is. As Jack was mentioning just before we started recording, these are wonderful little sessions to end to round off the day. It's intimate sessions. It's casual. It's not got all of the pressure and the hype of a keynote, but it's got all of the juicy conversation and deep thought as well. So, Sid, our first question to you this evening. Drum roll, please. Technology will be a big part of tomorrow's festival event, the Business of Tutoring Day, of course, at which Sid is delivering the first event of the day at 9 a.m. Now, we know that technology is here in tutoring, it's here to stay. And I wanted to open up this first conversation, this podcast tonight, by looking at how we ensure that our equity, diversity and inclusion initiatives, the ones that we're hoping to push now and in the years to come, can keep up with technological progress. So how can we marry together EDI with technology in the future, Sid?
Wow, that's such a big question. It's such a big question. I think one thing that technology does do is it allows access across the entire globe, for starters. So you're already bringing in a load of cultures and nationalities and ethnic groups into the mix, where before we would be doing face-to-face and it would all be our local area that you'd be targeting. So already it's opening up a lot of different customer bases for a lot of tutors and educators. And with that comes its challenges. And we've had those challenges at UK Virtual School, where we've got kids whose first language is not English. And I think to be able to kind of work together on that, we need to take a very human approach, because technology is great, but we have to take a very one-to-one approach with all the new families that we bring on board. And even with the amazing tech we have, there's still accessibility issues. There's people around the world that don't have access to basic internet and basic computers. So there's also that to take into account as well. So even though we can reach so many different families and kids around the globe, there's also loads that we aren't going to be able to reach. And so are there alternatives that we're going to be considering which are not tech related, that we can actually reach other families that we want to? And I'm sure there's loads of other initiatives that are going on at the moment, and that will be happening in the future. But there's two things. I think there has to be a tech-based approach and a non-tech-based approach as well, if we're going to really reach everyone that we want to reach, because it's all about having impact, and we have to really look at the families that we're trying to cater for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the probably the elephant in the room, isn't it? Is this access to technology, and you know, the act of having a computer or a gadget in front of you is one that many families and students are deprived of around the world, and which, you know, in truth, the pandemic has led to much greater spread and distribution of that. But if we put the actual fact of having a laptop or a computer in front of you to one side for a moment, if that's something that perhaps individuals, tutors, are not able to change in other parts of the world, how else, if we dive further into it, how else do we ensure that EDI initiatives are still included in our tech-based approach, but putting to one side the fact that students may not even be able to access technology? If and when they can, how can we continue to create a diverse and inclusive space in the online sphere?
I think there's lots of, like, inclusion and diversity and equality includes a whole host of different things. So if we look at SEN, for example, online can work really well with kids that have ADHD or have got autism. It just means that there's a different approach to the way you teach. And I think I've been talking about this, I spoke about this in the last tutoring festival as well, that the approach that we take and how we utilize the tech is more important than the actual tech that we're using. So Zoom, for example, has been around for a long time, and I was one of those believers that thought that Zoom, you can't teach on Zoom, surely you can't teach on Zoom. And prior to COVID, I took that approach where I thought teaching had to be face to face, and it had to be in the room with the kid, with resources and with hands-on things. And then when we are forced to actually look at things differently, that's when innovation really happens. So when we were forced to actually go online, and we were forced to actually, we didn't have a choice, right? And that was the only way that we could teach. That's when I started to really experiment, and we really see how things can be done differently. And by using Zoom, I was able to work with all sorts of kids. And I think it's about individually looking at the approach that the child needs. And it's still very much a one-to-one approach. Even when you're doing groups, each child will bring in a different angle to the group. And it's about being open to adapting what you have planned, and being open to realizing that actually that you might have planned X, Y, and Z, and you might have to go slightly off tangent because one of the kids needs something a bit more visual, or someone needs to, you realize that someone's being a bit fidgety, so they're going to need to move around a bit. So how do you implement that into your lesson to allow all of those kids to kind of participate? And I do something called Kung Fu Science, which I've just made up. We always do movement in our sessions. And I used to do this off Zoom, and I realized it works on Zoom as well. They can stand up, they can do different movements for different definitions of different science terminologies. And it's fun. And it means that the kids, especially young ones that can't sit still for very long, can stand up and move about a bit and get excited. And that's what learning is all about. So you can utilize technology to still have that fun element. And it's just about thinking outside the box a bit and changing the way that you might approach things. So we have all of these tools and things that you can use online. And sometimes we can get so absorbed into how we utilize them and how to use them. Well, actually, strip it back and keep it very basic, And you can just, by movement, by being creative, by getting your felt tip pens up, by having a second camera and just using pen on paper, you can bring things alive as well. So you don't need all of these wacky gadgets, even though they're amazing and I use them, and they all have their place. I think it's about adapting for the kids that you have. And some kids are going to be brilliant with using things like bit paper and online whiteboards. And some of them will want to use pen and paper and felt tips and movement and Lego. And it's about being able to being able to use tech and adapt it for each and every child that you've got. And I think that's what we're good at doing. That's what tutors and educators are really great at doing, taking knowledge and adapting it for the kids. And as we go forward, I think into a more tech orientated world, we just have to remember not to lose that, because once we lose that and it becomes a bit of a tick box exercise of getting kids into a classroom or on a webinar or into a classroom, and there's not that interaction, that's when we're going to start to lose the fun element in education. So by being open to change and being open to innovating, I think you'll learn naturally to be able to cater for all the different needs that the kids have.
And that's what tech's for, right?
Yeah.
If we can't enhance tech, which has been brought in to streamline and automate, to be able to find those solutions that perhaps a single educator didn't have in their arsenal, to cater for a wide range or variety of learning types, whatever the latest kind of thinking is, then what else is tech for? As Julia has put in the chat, at the center of tutoring is the relationship building, and that's perhaps one thing that tech may never have over us. Kind of whisper it quietly to the other humans in the room. But if tech can't achieve the ability to improve our job, then what place does it have? And I'd like to go into the kind of the nitty gritty of that even more. Sid, can you give us a flavor of some of the best tech hacks or best tech platforms that you've seen work well over the past kind of 18 months, over the past 2 years?
Well, let's take Zoom, for example. When you are in a physical classroom with kids, the only way that they can interact with you is by raising their hand in front of everyone and asking a question. Zoom allows a child to be able to ask a question without putting themselves on a spot. They can message quietly to the teacher directly. They can message to the entire group. They can raise their hand. They can vocalize. They can gesture. There's so many different ways that a child can communicate with a teacher, which will not be possible in a face-to-face classroom. Like the way that we utilize chat at UK Virtual School is such an integrated part of the way that we teach. So there's a lot of kids that have high anxiety. They've left school because they can't face going into a classroom, and they've been bullied, or they have other issues where actually putting themselves on a spot is really difficult for them. And just having the ability to put something into chat directly to the teacher without anyone knowing, and the teacher to be able to tackle that question without even highlighting who asked it, I think it's a really great way to be able to teach and to be able to utilize tech. And that's so simple. It's just using Zoom. And that's just one feature that I think has become such a central part at UK Virtual School and works really well with a lot of kids. And once they feel a little bit more comfortable, they'll send the answer to everyone in chat. And once they're a little bit more comfortable, they'll put their hand up and they'll offer to vocalize it. So it kind of gives them the stages to open up a little bit more as they build rapport with the rest of the class and with the teacher. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there are any kind of other ideas from the audience, then please do pop them in the Zoom chat. But I think that's a really central one, isn't it, Sid? And especially as obviously Zoom has grown phenomenally and is used very widespread, it's important to spend time on understanding the kind of ins and outs of Zoom, of the platform. But we've been talking there about technology, and we don't want to go too far down the road of just tech and how we can use that in education. I want to kind of bring it back a little bit to the topic of today's conversation, which is obviously equality, diversity, and inclusion in tutoring. And perhaps a good place to kind of get back to and start from again is why why do you think what is the resistance, conscious or subconscious, to kind of awareness of EDI amongst schools, amongst the education sector, in the tutoring sector? Why is there comparatively slow take up, do we think, to kind of EDI training amongst educators in this sector?
I think there's not enough in terms of teacher training. I don't think there's enough that goes into teacher training. I think a lot of you have heard my story of teacher training that I had, and I was really surprised at the lack of diversity training that I received. But when it comes to tutoring, most tutors will work one-to-one, and they think it doesn't apply in those cases where they're not working with huge amounts of kids, and with one-to-one, they think that they can build that relationship. But a lot of us, and everyone, holds unconscious biases. We all have it. It's part of our innate human nature to have that. And I think speaking about being self-aware, when you are unaware that you have these biases, then they'll come out and you won't realize that they're coming out. But when you are aware of what your biases are, then you can actually work towards eliminating them or reducing them and reducing the impact that they have. Because it's as little as how you speak to someone, the language that you use, the way that you approach something because you think that someone doesn't understand, or someone from a certain background won't really get what you're talking about. And it's those biases, and sometimes they're stereotypes, sometimes they come from a place where you're trying to help, but even that in itself can kind of manifest into something else. And I think it's important that we recognize as educators that being self-aware is really important, and part of diversity training is about becoming self-aware. It's about educating ourselves about all the differences that people have, and then being more aware of how we can bridge that gap. So I'm really passionate that we undergo some sort of training, even if it's not training, but talking to people. I think the more you talk to different types of people from different backgrounds, from different minority groups, the more you learn. And the more you learn, the less foreign or alien something becomes, and you're more open to then adapting the way that you do things. And for example, like Clubhouse, I think is amazing. I found Clubhouse to be amazing, to be able to connect with people that you wouldn't normally connect with. And I think you can become very much isolated in your little bubble, and you only know the people that you know, and then that in itself can cause that endless cycle of that you don't really expand your horizon. And then when you're put into a different platform, like Clubhouse was completely new, you then come across people that you would not normally come across, and eventually that becomes a bubble as well, because you're connecting and following a certain set of people. But opportunities like that, where you are going to be around different people, I think educators should snap up, because that's how they're going to learn. They're going to learn how to communicate with people. They're going to learn something different. And part of us going into education is because we love learning, right? So why wouldn't we want to put ourselves in a position where we want to learn and continue to learn? And I think what you guys are doing at Love Tutoring is brilliant, because you're giving a platform for educators to actually be aware that they don't know everything, and then going and finding ways to fill those gaps and to network and to make those connections and to learn and to grow together. And I think that's really important as educators, when we are so isolated in so many ways when it comes to running our own businesses. So that's one thing that I think we can all work towards. I don't think there's anyone that can say, I know it all, or I know how to deal with every single situation that there is out there, because we don't. And there's always going to be things that arise that we're going to be confused about, and cultural differences that might come up, and you don't know how to react, or you don't know how to go about a situation. And sometimes a lot of miscommunication is because of cultural differences. And cultural differences doesn't mean that the person is from a different ethnic minority group. It could just mean that you're in different regions of the country and things are done differently. Language is different in different places, right? So there's loads of barriers that can come across where people think that this is blunt or this is rude, but actually that's how people talk, or that's how they've always done things. So there's a lot that I think we need to be open to. And to become non-judgmental it just means that we just need to be open to new ways of doing things and learning. And it comes back to being open, and which is what we were talking about with tech as well. But yeah, I'm really passionate, and I could go and go into the story about my own diversity training, but it was awful. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done in teaching as well, because most educators come from a teaching background, and we've only had that brief diversity training that we might have had in our teacher training, or maybe once a year we touch on it. But actually, diversity and inclusion and equality needs to be embedded in our everyday. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be a one-off tick box exercise that you do once a year. It should be something that we do on a day-to-day basis, and it's ingrained in what we do. And I think that's really important for us to realize that.
Yeah. So you mentioned there that, that you don't need to know everything. This is not a case where you study, and then you pass a qualification, and there's a tick next to the phrase EDI, and then you can kind of move on and learn the next thing. And I totally agree with that. But what happens if you're an educator, a tutor who feels that they know nothing, or feels that they're very much not in a position of knowledge in this area? What advice would you have for an educator, a tutor, for whom the phrase EDI stirs up some kind of anxiety or fear that you're wrong, or fear that you're going to be caught out? What are kind of some of the stepping stones for an educator who wants to embed this in their practice, but doesn't know how?
I would say just be curious. Like, ask questions. No one's going to hold a question against you, right? And you might not feel comfortable doing it on an open platform. So find someone that you think that you can talk to and ask questions. So I often get questions in my Facebook Messenger from people that I've come across on Facebook, but they're just curious about, they've had a situation with another individual who happens to be from the same faith group or ethnicity or whatever as me. And they want to know, like, am I doing this right? Should I do this? Should I respond like this? And people are terrified of being wrong, but there's no harm in asking, and even asking the individual. If you're not sure, just ask. I think if you come from a place of curiosity, no one's going to hold that against you. No one's going to point a finger and say, "How do you not know that?" And the people are going to be willing to help and willing to guide you to literature, or guide you to someone that can help you. So I think that's the first step. Just be curious to go and search. You can Google things. You can ask people around you. You can reach out to individuals. You can. There's so much at our fingertips right now. So I think that would be the first step. Don't ever feel like you should know this and it's so bad that you don't. Like, I'm the first to kind of admit that I don't know things. I'm the first to admit that I can't spell. I'm the first to admit when I make a mistake, right? And I think even kids need to see that in adults, that we as adults don't know everything. We can get things wrong, and it's fine, because we are not that fountain of knowledge that sometimes we make out to be in schools. We actually have a limit to that, but we're facilitators, especially in the tutoring sphere. We're facilitators. We have our limit to what our knowledge is, but we can build those steps to bridge the knowledge that we don't have right now. And that's where we are at the moment. We're constantly learning, and we're constantly doing better and making ourselves better. And I don't think anyone can ask more of you than that. Be curious, ask questions, and don't be afraid to get things wrong, because that's how you learn.
And I think the availability of, as Jack's been putting in the chat there, the availability of knowledge and potential learning has massively grown over the pandemic. As many areas of training and professional development have moved online. It is at your fingertips. And Google is your friend. I think, kind of linking a little bit to our previous event with Victoria Burns just before this. One of the students I've been working with recently, I was trying to come up with synonyms for a particular word, and just typed in on Google, whatever, big synonym, and my student was like, "Hey, you can't do that. That's cheating. You can't just look on Google." And I think we've probably taught kids to think that Googling something is cheating, but actually, that's not where 21st century learning comes from. Is not knowing the 10 biggest rivers in South America, or 10 synonyms for the word big. It's learning to apply that knowledge. And I think the same applies to increasing your understanding of EDI, is not thinking it's thinking that if you just type it in on Google, then that's somehow cheating, or that's somehow undercutting it. I don't think it is. I think in terms of basing your learning, just as you're saying there, Sid, as a way of giving yourself a comfortable base for these kind of areas, that's not a bad place to look at all. So yeah, keep popping your ideas down in the chat. I do feel very sorry for podcast listeners who are only catching this in their ears at some later date, because there's so much going on in the Zoom chat as well, and we'll try and tie some of that in where we can as well, so that you don't miss out. But Sid, what's on the horizon for you then this coming year? What are your projects that your business ventures? How are they mapping in? How are they tying in these areas of EDI that we've been talking about just here?
Well, UK Virtual School is getting bigger and bigger in the world. Like we've just recently had a couple of American families join up, which is brand new for us, but they're living in the UK, but they've just come from America. And I think we're now over 4 different continents. I don't know how many different countries. And I think the amazing thing with online is that we have all of these kids from all around the globe, and I think I've told you this before, where I can be in a class with them and I'm like, oh, it's cold here in the UK, and one of them's like, oh, it's in the middle of the night here, and the other one's like, oh, it's like 20 degrees, or another one's like, it's 50 degrees here. And it's just amazing how we can all be connected at the same time, and they can be from all over the globe. And what that brings is lots of challenges in terms of there's so many festivals that go on during the year, that we've got kids coming in and out that are away, that are going to family. We've got Ludo year coming on the 1st of February, so we're doing a celebration for that. So we're trying to incorporate as many of these festivities into our calendar, so we can recognize and celebrate together all of these amazing things that happen around the world. So that's one thing that's happening. And then we're also off to Marrakesh later on this year. So I know Lucy's here. Lucy's coming as well. And we're going to be doing some great work in the Atlas Mountains with a village school there. And we're going to be teaching there. And I think being able to give something back to a community that's going to be welcoming us there, I think is a really nice way to kind of leave a mark as well, and they will definitely leave a mark on us, because we'll be learning about the culture and the community. And I think part of us being educators is that we can leave this mark with whoever we come across. We can leave this knowledge. I'm always talking about things when I'm meeting people and sharing knowledge, and equally they can leave knowledge with us. And it's this never ending, if you think about it as a domino effect, you're giving knowledge, you're receiving knowledge, and it's never ending. And I think part of being open to learning, and it comes back to that openness again, is that you continue to learn and you pass on that knowledge, and that person passes it on again. And it becomes this exciting pool of people that are, I don't know, just passing on knowledge to each other. So yeah, that's one thing that I'm really excited about. I think Marrakesh is going to be amazing. And I'm excited about what I'm going to learn about the culture, because there's so much that you can learn from books and from the internet. And when you're with people and when you immerse in a culture, it's completely different. And I think that's something else that we need to be aware that there's, as much as internet is great and we can teach online, immersing ourselves in an experience is something different altogether. And this is something that I encourage all the kids at UK Virtual School. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm teaching you guys online and you're learning online, but go out there, go to museums, go to the park, go and immerse yourself in the outdoors, join groups, join drama groups, join sports groups, because learning doesn't just stop when you put your pen down and you close your textbook or you close your book. Learning continues. And I think that's where you'll realize, like we all realize that actually, if we change our kind of mindset into what education and learning really is, you realize that learning is just continuous. And I think, and then this is where I find like diversity, inclusion, and EDI is all kind of the same thing, because it's just more learning. You're just open to learning more things. And if you're curious and you're excited about what's out there, and you're curious about people, and you're curious about asking questions, you will pick up nuances in the way people do things differently. You'll pick up nuances in the way that kids work. Like I've never had any specialist training in SEN, like none at all. All my training has been from kids themselves. I'll ask them, how do you work best? How can we do things differently? How do you know, like, what makes you excited? What do you like doing? Do you want to paint? Do you want to draw? What do you want to do today? And I think when you have those conversations with people, you will pick up on how they work, and then you adapt. And as you speak to more people, you learn more tools and you learn more techniques, and then you've got all of this toolkit that you can just then grab things out of whenever you meet someone new. And it's the same with diversity and inclusion and equality. It's you, the more people you speak to, the more people that you have conversations with and network with, the more things that you'll pick up, the nuances you'll pick up, the little celebrations or festivities or little differences that they hold close to themselves. And then when you then meet someone else, you'll have all of this toolkit that you can just kind of bring out when you need to. And that's what it's all about. It's about being so non-judgmental that you're open to kind of learning new things. And you don't, and you know what? As much as I say that, of course I'll judge. I'll still be judging people, right? Because that's human nature. But then you catch yourself and you go, no, right, I can't do that. I don't know this person. We're going to start on a fresh fresh sheet of paper, and then you have a conversation, and then you kind of learn about the person, and then you adapt. And you're like, actually, I got that wrong. I thought they were going to be like this, and they're actually like this. And you realize that every single person is their own person. And I think that's what's really important. Sometimes we can get lost in grouping people, and you say this group is all going to be like this, and this group is going to be like this. And as much as labels are brilliant in helping us to navigate the world, they can also be a barrier when it comes to actually really getting to know someone. So forget all those labels, get to know the person, and then think about the tools that you have and bring those in. So you might have an autistic kid, and you might be like, okay, they're going to be learning like this. But actually, that tool that you used with an ADHD kid or a kid that was EAL actually might work in this particular situation. But you just need to be able to adapt. And I think that's what just become great actors. Educators become great actors. We can slip into any role, and we know how to respond to a child, and we know how to interact with a kid. And that's what's really exciting. No two kids are ever the same. And that brings its challenges. And I see it as a challenge. Like before COVID, I had a couple of kids from our local authority that were really behind. They weren't doing well. And then I moved online with them. And I was told, this is going to be near impossible. These are kids that don't even go to school, let alone are they going to open a laptop and take part in a lesson with you. And one of the kids, it was a challenge. He wouldn't even sit at the laptop the first time we had a session. And slowly, we started implementing things that he wanted to do. So he wanted to draw cars, and he wanted to talk about the cartoons he was watching. And from there, we did some maths, and we did some spelling, and I snuck some little bits and pieces of teaching in there. And eventually he would look forward to meeting me. And his mum would say, he's actually a lot more switched on in school as well now, and he wants to go into school. And the impact that we have is amazing. We just don't always see it. And it's not, and sometimes parents don't tell us, and we don't realize the impact that we're having. But each and every one of you that's listening right now, you are having enormous impact on each child that you're working with. And sometimes we don't see it on a day-to-day basis because we're so busy, we're moving on from one kid to another. But reflect back 6 months ago when you first started working with a child, and you'll see the impact that you've had. Have a chat with the parents and you'll see the impact that you've had. And I think it's about treating each child differently, and you'll really realize that they're their own human being, and they have all of their quirks. And this is something we talk about at UK Virtual School a lot. We talk about all of us being part of a family. And we talk about all our quirks. Like, we embrace the fact that we're all different. We embrace the fact that we come with our quirks and our differences and all our little bits and pieces that make us want to learn differently. And that's why we have so much flexibility in the way that the kids can learn. So we've got live classes, we've got webinars where the kids don't even have to have their camera on. We've got video content, so they don't even have to be present. So there's different ways for them to communicate, different ways for them to learn. And I have this discussion with the parents. I'm like, find what works for your child. And it might not be us, which is completely fine, but find what works and then work with that. Because when it comes to tutoring and us as educators, we can mold our education to fit around the child rather than the child molding around the education, which is what happens in schools. So we are at an advantage where we can provide something so bespoke to a kid. And I feel like I've talked loads now, Ludo, so I'm going to be quiet so you can ask another question.
Let's vote as an audience. Do we want to stop at 40 minutes or do we want to allow Sid to keep talking? Because there's so much nodding going on and there's so much going on here.
No, let's do Sid a kindness and let her see what's been going on in the chat alongside her contributions, because you'll see that we're really, really with you, Sid, and we're thinking alongside you. It's been fabulous.
No two kids are the same, no two tutors are the same as well, which has lots of knock-on meanings to it as well. And I think that if we are teaching or if we are coming to tutoring with openness and curiosity, then we are teaching the next generation of students to do exactly the same. And it's so much more important for kids to be open and curious when they start their careers of learning than it is even probably for adults, because that sets them on a path to being curious adults later in life, which is net positive. So Sid. Are we going to see in 2022 the reappearance of talking of experience and practical skills? Are we going to see a reappearance of Femtinos, the science workshops?
I've been back. I was back in September. Maybe not as crazy as I was before, because we used to do like 9 workshops a week. Each one of them was completely different. I was crazy. I'd be up in the office till 10 p.m. trying to print things and box things. So we're not as crazy as we were. But from September, we were doing 3 workshops a week, and then a couple of them on the weekend. We've done a few science shows and a Halloween science show, which was brilliant. I was dressed up as a skeleton. I don't know whether you guys have seen the YouTube video on that, but that was scary for me. Like, I'm always telling the kids to have a growth mindset and be open to being challenged and doing scary things. And I painted my face and I dressed up in a skeleton costume. And I was terrified of leaving the house looking like that, because I was like, what are people going to say? Like, what's going to happen? It was scary. And I did, and I was really proud of myself. But I think it's things like that where we push ourselves outside our normal kind of comfort zones, where we grow a little. And that experience was really interesting, because it was the first time I was publicly not visibly in a hijab. And that was so interesting for me, because all my adult life, I've been wearing a headscarf, to then not be seen as someone wearing a headscarf because I had a cape on my head and my face was all painted. And just to see how people treat you differently. And that makes me sad, because I was treated differently. And so it kind of encourages me even more that we need to make a difference through education, because it's these kids that are going to grow up and be the next generation where there is going to be a big change. So yeah, there's lots of stuff happening with Femtinos. We have paused over the last month and a half, and we'll be starting back again in February with a Valentine's special, how to mend a broken heart. It's going to be a dissection. That's how I roll, right? With like 100 participants, but we're going to spread it over 2 sessions, so it'll be 50-50. We've never done it that big before, but there'll be real hearts and they'll all have a go. So it's going to be great, because they'll all be wearing masks and gloves and dressed up as surgeons, so all COVID safe. But yeah, that's still happening. And even that has been quite a journey, because I've done that for 11 years. with 12,000 kids, and it's been amazing how science can unite people from everywhere. Like science is like math. Science and maths are languages where everyone can relate to it. Like people get excited about science. There's topics that everyone can relate to, right? Like poo. But there's like unifying topics where everyone can come together and learn together. And I think that's great. Like we have mixed age abilities. We have kids with special educational needs. And it's always amazing to see how the kids come together in a collaborative environment, because when they're visibly different ages, they don't compete anymore. They're all about collaboration. And you see like the younger kids working with the older ones, and the older ones working with the younger ones, and the older ones are learning creative skills from the younger ones, because the young kids have got like amazing imaginations. And the older kids, the younger kids are learning the dexterity skills from the older ones. And it works so nice. And I just wish that adults will learn from that, because the kids have such a nice way of doing things. So no, Femtinos has been happening. So yeah, I've been busy. It's been busy. And I think 2022 is also going to be a really busy year for us. Hence the late nights. But yeah, I'm going to have an early morning tomorrow, though.
Late nights and early mornings. That's what 2022 is about, perhaps. No one. No, I'm not encouraged. Sorry, I can see Jack already shaking his head. I'm not encouraging anyone to have fewer hours of sleep in 2022. Sid, thank you so much for taking us on that journey. We know that there's so much more to come from all of those ventures that you've been detailing, of course, including Femtino's. There has been so much thinking here tonight. I can't really believe that we've packed so much into it, especially that the second half of this conversation, this podcast. There was so much going on there. Don't let that end here. Don't let that end at the end of this podcast. Take that into the way that you talk about tutoring publicly, the way you talk about tutoring with parents, with schools, on social media. This can't just be contained to the 18 people here in this room. That's why we brought the Love Tutoring Festival together. That's why we bring as many tutors as we can, and we're relying on you to help us bring more to this festival. That's why we've asked Sid to speak on the Monday here and on Tuesday morning about something completely different, but that's why we've brought this, as much of this together as we can. So I kind of feel like we should do a podcast in a couple of months, the exact same people here, and just do it all again, because there's too much thinking in here to just that be the end of the conversation. So there is the Science Hub, which will be kicking off at the end, straight after the launch, straight after the Love Tutoring Festival. That will be led by Georgina Green, who I'm so sad has missed this entire conversation, because she would absolutely have loved to have nerded out about science, and I'm sure dissection. Georgina will be leading the Science Hub, and you can find out more about that at the Discovery Rooms every day from 4 till 6 p.m. But Sid, thank you, a huge thank you. I hope you enjoyed talking about all that you do.
Thank you for having me. And guys, join me tomorrow morning for a session on branding, because I'm really excited to be doing that as well. So that's going to be tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Yeah, and see how I look first thing in the morning. We'll see how many hours of sleep I get. So you can ask me tomorrow morning, guys.
Well, alternatively, we just leave this Zoom room on and no one goes to bed. We leave it on. Sid won't, so we'll just leave it on, and then Sid can go to bed at 10 a.m. No, if anyone is able to keep up with this evening's conversation and a whole CPD accredited workshop on branding tomorrow morning, then you get an extra special sticker, because those are two very distinct topics. I've just put in the chat the form where we can gather your thoughts about all of the events today to make sure that we do it better when we next do it. So click on that link now, if only to keep it up on your screen. You don't have to complete it now, but we'd like to hear your thoughts on what we did well today and what we could have improved on any of the events that you attended. So that is the end of day one at the Love Tutoring Festival 2. That was Sid Femtino in all of her might and force. And I thank you so much to everyone who is currently sitting here now, clapping and cheering and showing big smiles, because you really made that event, as the Late Night Live podcasts always do. So one final time this evening, cheerio, everyone. If you're listening on the podcast, then lucky you, listen back as many times as you can. And we will see you all again for Tuesday, the 25th of January, kicking off with Sid Femtino's workshop on branding. Good night, everyone. Cheerio. Bye.
Bye.